Today's video sponsor is GVG Mall, bringing you all the software deals you need, like Windows 10, Windows 11, Office 2021 with a new Windows 11 design, and even Windows Server 2022. For all of these, you can use my SKG discount code for 25% off, getting a Windows 10 serial key for only $16. Then use the key on your Windows settings and you'll have an activated system. Some days ago, the renowned Taiwanese overclocker called HiCookie was able to achieve DDR5 9058 on an AMD system. And yeah, you heard it right, 9058 megatransfers per second, or if you want to call it differently, well, 9058 MHz. If you know about AMD's AM5 platform, you know that Ryzen 7000 series CPU sweet spot, as stated by AMD, is DDR5 6000. Some people with good kits can reach higher values, let's say like 6200 or 6400, let's say, but it won't actually go much further than that, meaning that even if you had a DDR5 7800 kit, you would have to underclock it, let's say, to 6000 and then tweak the timings to get way better performance, like you can see in this video that I made. But with the recent introduction of the AGESA 1007B, which is still in beta by the way, the potential was unlocked and way higher RAM frequencies are now achievable. And by the way, if you're asking yourself what AGESA actually is, it is a part of the BIOS that controls CPU cores, chipsets, memory, hypertransport / Infinity Fabric, well, we can call it CPU microcode. Now cutting through all those fantasy titles and going straight to the point. Will this actually increase the performance, the overall performance? Well, maybe not. With the previous Ryzen generations 5000 and below, we had both the Infinity Fabric and memory controller frequencies synced with the RAM frequency, meaning that in order to achieve the best performance you would need to stay in the same 1:1:1 ratio. Meaning, for example, that with DDR4 4000, which is in reality 2000 MHz without DDR, you would be running 2000 to 2000 to 2000. Ryzen 7000 series on the other hand use DDR5, but the Infinity Fabric can't achieve much over 2000 MHz, so in order to handle the higher DDR5 frequencies, AMD entirely decoupled the Infinity Fabric from the RAM and memory controller frequencies, which of course had some latency penalties, but was needed to make things run properly. But now with these even higher frequencies, there's another catch. If before the Infinity Fabric had to be decoupled, now it is the memory controller that has to run at 1 to 2 because it most likely can't go much over 3000 MHz. So to pack this up, the AMD sweet spot is running DDR5 6000 with the memory controller at 3000 MHz and the Infinity Fabric at 2000 MHz. But if the memory controller decouples at, let's say, 3400 MHz, DDR5 6800, if you're running, for example, the DDR5 7200, the memory controller would most likely run at 1 to 2. The Infinity Fabric would still be 2000 MHz, but the memory controller would be 1800 MHz instead of the pretended 3600 MHz. Meaning that you would actually need DDR5 12000 to run the memory controller at 3000 MHz, because the real RAM frequency would be 6000 MHz, and since it goes to 1 to 2 ratio, the memory controller frequency would finally be at the recommended 3000 MHz. And all of this doesn't seem much optimal, right? And this is all to say that these are great news, obviously, because we can achieve higher memory frequencies, but if the memory controller does decouple after a certain frequency, the better scenario would be to find the highest RAM frequency in which the memory controller could run at 1:1 ratio, and then tweak the timings and subtimings for the best performance. And of course, in some scenarios, the huge increase in memory bandwidth can actually help to mitigate the lower memory controller frequency, obviously, but in most scenarios, the difference will be null, or in most scenarios, you won't have any gains in performance at all, as can already be seen in several benchmarks online. That once again show that the performance difference is null, or in most cases you even have lower performance due to a lower memory controller frequency. But as always, I'll try to test it myself as soon as an official BIOS gets released, to see how much we can actually push the memory controller frequency and if we really have some benefits from using higher RAM frequencies even with the memory controller running at 1 to 2. And if you're thinking about Intel CPUs, they are exactly the same. That's why they have an option on BIOS called Gear, and you have usually Gear 1, Gear 2 and Gear 4, meaning that the ratios can be 1 to 1, Gear 1, 1 to 2, Gear 2 or 1 to 4, Gear 4. Because once again, even Intel's memory controller, which is slightly better than the AMD one, can't still achieve all that you need. So in most scenarios, if you're running on an Intel CPU, let's say 8000 MHz RAM, you won't be running at 1:1 ratio, that's for sure. That's for sure. You'll be running at 1:2 ratio, or in some scenarios, let's say 1:4 ratio. For example, one of my friends recently built a 12400F system with DDR5, and of course, it's not the 13th series, it's the 12th series, okay? But even there, the memory controller isn't much different. And even with DDR5, the motherboard would put it automatically at Gear 2 running 6400 MHz RAM, okay? And if it tried, let's say, Gear 1 at 6400 MHz, it wouldn't boot, okay? It would need to raise, for example, the VCSAA or VSCAA voltage, which is basically the memory controller voltage, L3 cache voltage, and so on. You would need to raise it considerably in order to be able to run 6400 MHz at Gear 1, so let alone 7200, 8000 MHz. So for the Intel CPUs, it is exactly the same. And well guys, that's all for today's video. Thanks a lot for watching. If you want to know more about this topic, you can leave your question in the comment section, and as always, I'll try to answer as fast as I can, okay? More videos will come, more GPU comparisons will come. I'll start doing CPU comparisons as well, once again, because I stopped doing them like 2 years ago, long time. The last one I made was like 1 year ago, but it was a solo one, so I will start constantly doing more CPU comparisons, because I already have RAM comparisons, GPU comparisons, so I do want to make CPU comparisons once again. By the way, and once again, comment section if you have any doubts, and let me know what you think about this topic and what you think about the current results that are hovering the internet where you don't actually get much more performance. Some of them also, but take in consideration that some of them are using the Ryzen 7 7800X 3D, and those chips have way more L3 cache than the usual normal CPU, so since they have more cache, the memory won't affect them as much. So in normal 7000 series, for example, the memory may make more difference than on the X3D chips, but overall I don't think it will. That's just my opinion for now, before I test those configurations. But once again, thanks a lot for watching, and see you in the next video, guys. Thank you.